Hello and welcome to this week's edition of iTorah. Those who really don't understand Judaism very well tend to think of it as being a patriarchal religion, where women at best are second-class citizens. However, if we take a more serious look at our sources, we can easily find that this is not the case. Let's look at the book of Leviticus, and more specifically this week's parasha, which is Parshas Tazria, which deals with the laws of purity and impurity. Now Leviticus generally, and especially this week's parasha, tend to be rather obscure, dealing with matters of sacrifices, laws of purity, impurity, which really don't pertain today in the absence of a temple. But nevertheless, there are in fact certain elements or certain morals, certain ethics, certain forms of spiritual instruction that we can learn and which are very pertinent to our lives, more specifically, which actually address the question that we've just posed, the position of a woman in Jewish thought and in Jewish belief. Now in the beginning of the parasha, what we read is that a woman who gives birth to a child is not allowed to be with a husband for 7 days and is not allowed to enter the temple for 40 days. Now that's the case if it's a male child. What happens if she gives birth to a female child, a girl? In that case, she's not allowed to be with her husband for 14 days and she's not allowed to enter into the temple for 80 days. One would think it's a clear case of discrimination against the fairer sex. But that's only on the surface. Let's look a little deeper at the laws of purity and impurity. Essentially, most forms of impurity are associated with death. Indeed, the highest form of impurity, which we call Avi Avot HaTumah, the grandfather of all impurities, is a corpse. Now, whether it's a Jewish corpse or the corpse of a non-Jewish person, touching the corpse renders a person to be impure on the highest level. Now, is there a difference, though, between a Jewish corpse and a non-Jewish corpse? Or, more so, is there a difference between a human corpse and an animal corpse? Is there any difference at all? It so happens that there is. Now we know that all human beings are created in the image of God, as we read at the very beginning of Genesis. B'Tselem Elokim Baroto, He created them in the image of God, and that's referring to both Jew and non-Jew as well. Nevertheless, we Jews are specially chosen by God. As it says in the book of Exodus, V'atem tiyu mamlechet kohanim v'goy kadosh, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. The Jews have been specially elected by God. So much so that God has put an extra soul into them, a neshama yetera. Now, I haven't got time, and this is not the right place to elaborate upon that. But how does that play out in the laws of purity and impurity? Well, as I said earlier, touching any corpse will render you impure. However, being in the same room, under the same roof as a Jewish corpse, will also render you impure. Being in the same room, under the same roof as a non-Jewish corpse, in fact, will not render you impure. So we see that there's greater impurity associated with a Jew than with a non-Jew. And that's why when we bury a Jew, even today, a Kohen is not allowed to be in the Chevra Kedisha. We put him into a separate room with a separate roof. Because even today, a Kohen has to be careful of the laws of impurity. What happens if there was a non-Jewish corpse? The Kohen wouldn't have to be concerned about that. So we find this really strange thing that the Jewish corpse, and we're the ones with the extra soul, are more impure than a non-Jewish corpse. I'll give you another example. We say that sleep is like 1/60th of death. And that when you wake up in the morning, your soul returns to you, and it's a kind of revival of the dead. But nevertheless, a little bit of that sleep lingers according to the Kabbalists, and this is actually mentioned in the codes of Jewish law as well, on the tips of your finger, and therefore in the morning you have to wash your hands 6 times, alternately on each hand. So what you do is you pour onto your right hand, and then you pour onto your left hand, you pour onto your right hand, you pour onto your left hand, you pour onto your right hand, you onto your left hand, and that removes the residual impurity. What happens if you don't, and you're Jewish, and you touch food? Well, you render the food impure, and really you shouldn't be eating that food. What happens if a non-Jewish person touches food, and most food today is produced by non-Jewish people? We don't have to be concerned. We only have to be concerned about a Jew. Seems that a Jew is able to create more impurity than a non-Jew. And what's all this about? The answer, however, is that purity and impurity go hand in hand. And our rabbis explained to us that the more pure or the more holy a person is when he's in the pure state, the greater the impurity when that pure state passes. And therefore, because a Jew is being specifically elected by God, so when he's alive, he has greater power, he's got greater potential. And when he dies, the forces of impurity are more attracted to him, and therefore he's associated with greater impurity. Similarly also, when he goes to sleep at night, because he had so much more potential during the daytime, so when his soul left him at night, the forces of impurity are more attracted to him. And therefore it's more important for him to wash his hands. And similarly also applies to men and women. The reason why a man elicits less impurity than a woman, only 7 days as opposed to 14, only 40 as opposed to 80, is because indeed a woman has greater holiness and purity associated with her than men. And why is this? Because holiness is associated more than anything else with life. And it's women who are the breeders of life, the creators of life, the guardians of life. And therefore when a girl is born, and when a girl leaves her mother's womb, there is more holiness departing from the mother than when the boy leaves the womb. And this therefore elicits a greater level of impurities at the termination of the pregnancy, when the child is born, in the case of a girl, than in the case of a boy. So it's all's not what we see. The reality is that women have this greater holiness than men, and therefore they elicit, when it lapses, even greater impurity. To just round this off, we spoke about the difference between Jew and non-Jew, and men and women. Can anyone understand now why, other than very exceptional circumstances, an animal doesn't elicit any impurity at all? The reason is because he doesn't have the potential, not of a human and not of a woman. Wish you all Shabbat Shalom.